Okay, we are, I think this is part four. Is it part four, I think? Daniel, is it part four? Part five. Thank you, Daniel. This is part five in a series that I entitled Life Without God. We've been making our way through various portions of the book of Ecclesiastes, the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes. And if you were here last week, then you will remember that not only was the passage depressing, but I was depressing. And the fact that any of you showed up today is a miracle. The fact that none of you slit your wrists when you left and you came back this morning is a miracle. But I am uber excited about this passage. Yesterday was a very, very different kind of prep day for me. I mentioned last week that the Saturday before, as I prepped, it was really hard. It was like I was swimming in quicksand. The passage was hard. I was feeling heavy. The passage was heavy. And so I was a little bit nervous coming into this particular Saturday, and I found myself thoroughly enjoying the prep and the things that I learned. And it's a great privilege to be able to learn things from God on a Saturday and then stand up in front of a group of people and share those things on a Sunday. It's a huge privilege. So I'm looking forward to this morning. And these are probably the most famous verses in Ecclesiastes. Even if you've never read Ecclesiastes before, even if you've never heard of Ecclesiastes before, these verses you are probably familiar with. You've probably heard them somewhere at some time. Chapter 3, beginning in verse 1, the writer says this: "For everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to harvest, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to cry and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to turn away, a time to search and a time to quit searching, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be quiet and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace." What do people really get for all their hard work? I have seen the burden God has placed on us all, yet God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He has planted eternity in the human heart, but even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. So I concluded there is nothing better than to be happy and enjoy ourselves as long as we can. And people should eat and drink and enjoy the fruits of their labor, for these are gifts from God. And I know that whatever God does is final. Nothing can be added to it or taken from it. God's purpose is that people should fear him. What is happening now has happened before, and what will happen in the future has happened before, because God makes the same things happen over and over again. So I've shared this quote probably every week in the course of this series from C.S. Lewis, where he writes, "Human history is the long, terrible story of man trying to find something other than God which will make him happy." And I've said each time I've shared that quote that really is Ecclesiastes in a nutshell. Ecclesiastes is this bold and honest look at the ways we try to find happiness and meaning in life apart from God. And I've said each week that the subtitle to Ecclesiastes could easily be "The Search," because the writer of Ecclesiastes is searching He's on the hunt. He begins, in fact, many of his paragraphs by saying, I have seen, I have tested, I have discovered, meaning that he's not some ivory tower scholar or theorist. He's slugging his way through life on the ground, desperately looking for something to make him feel alive, something that will satisfy, just like us. And what he concludes over and over again is that everything and everyone in this world will fail you in some way and at some point. Relying on an achievement or an experience or a person or a dream, basically anything under the sun, to be the ultimate source of meaning and purpose and identity is like building a house on the sand. He says it's like chasing after the wind. Something that you can never catch, that you chase your entire lives, but you can never catch. Well, we've looked in the last few weeks at how he tried to find life apart from God in pleasure. We've looked at how he's tried to find life apart from God in wisdom, in accomplishments, and how all of these avenues left him high and dry. Well, these verses, the ones I just read, he talks about time, meticulously talks about time. But what he's ultimately getting at is the issue of control, ultimately. These verses are both the most popular and, in my opinion, the most misunderstood verses in all of Ecclesiastes. If you've ever heard these verses before, you may have heard them at a funeral. They're often read as a way of bringing comfort to family members. And while I think there is a sense of comfort in these verses when it comes to that, these verses are actually intended to show us the haunting, uncontrollable nature of time. There is a professor at Boston College, philosophy professor at Boston College, who's probably in his mid-80s now, by the name of Peter Kraft. And he wrote this: time is a river that takes from us everything it gives us. Is there progress? Does time go anywhere? Are we in a story? Not if observation under the sun tells us the truth about time. For such observation under the sun sees only cycles. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. What gain has the worker from his toil? Under the sun, he says, there is no good news. Progress is a myth. Well, the writer to Ecclesiastes wants us to see that life under the sun is untamable. It's uncontrollable. Seasons come and seasons go. All of us live and all of us die. Life is an unpredictable mixture of good times and bad times, good days and bad days, peaks and valleys. I was looking forward to these verses when I started the series because I think about time more now than ever. I think it's probably because I'm older and I may be more reflective. I may be more self-aware of the time I've wasted, time I've squandered. I gave a picture to Daniel yesterday that I want him to put up. But it seems like just yesterday, oh, he's running back to the sound booth. Hold on. Let's all sing a song together for a second. Kumbaya. Oh, there it is. It seems like just yesterday, my kids were that small. Gabe on the right, who's 29 now. Nate on the left, is 27. He just turned 27 this past Wednesday. And Jenna in the middle, the perfect looking child. I could pick them up. I could hold them. They reached for me the way that Meadow reached for Stacy a few minutes ago. They wanted me to put them to bed, to read to them, to play with them. I remember when I was in graduate school before Jenna was born, we lived in a townhouse, and I would get home from school every day around 3:30 or 4, and my two boys would be waiting, pressed up against the screen door with a football under their arms, just counting the minutes until I got home to where we could go out and play. That seemed like yesterday. It is a hard thing to look at pictures like that for me these days. Their mom and I were their chief source of help and comfort and safety. I have nothing but the sweetest memories of those days. Yeah, it was, we were sleep deprived and we were worn out, and the physical exhaustion that accompanies caring for kids that age. That's what you feel in the moment. But as you get older and you reflect back on that time, at least I wish I could go back, savor every second. And I'm so grateful that I got to experience those days. But those days are over. They're now grown. My oldest son has 3 boys of his own now. They still look to me for help and comfort, but in a different way. And I would literally give my right arm to be able to go back to those days and just stay there. Stay there. I can hardly look at pictures of them at that age without feeling heartsick. And yet the memories were so sweet. It grips me in ways I can't explain. I miss those days. I don't know what to say. I miss those days. But there's no going back. Sweet memories are both a blessing and a curse in so many different ways. I also think about how much I love in this season of life, these days, the precious things I get to experience with the precious people that I love in these days, in this season of life, and how these days will one day be as far away as those days are to me now. Time passes so quickly. The sun rises and the sun sets every 24 hours. My oldest grandson, Mason, is almost 9 now, and it seems like just yesterday he was born. And I've learned a lot about slowing down, savoring the moment, appreciating the time, not taking minutes for granted. Time continues to pass, and I can't stop it no matter how much I try and slow it down. No matter how deeply I try to savor moments, they pass. I can't stop it. And for some reason, that makes me sad these days. This is about as depressing as it was last week. It gets better, I promise. I promise. It makes me sad, but if I'm really being honest, it also scares me. It stokes a fear in me because it causes me to ask questions like, what am I missing? What should I be doing? How should I be spending my time? Is there any way that I can better slow things down? How do I ensure that I minimize my regrets? Are there opportunities passing me by that I'm missing that I need to grab onto and hold on to? If I missed If I miss this, if I miss that, it scares me. It's been said that the root of control is fear. That makes sense to me. It resonates with me. Whether I like to admit it or not, and it's an embarrassing admission, I depend on my ability to control things to make me feel safe, to make me feel happy, to make me feel secure. And I don't think that's just me. I think consciously or unconsciously, we all do that to one degree or another. And nothing confronts my inability to control things like the passing of time. Nothing. I might think that I'm doing a pretty good job of controlling this or that or the other. And then time passes, and as it passes, it reminds me that I'm not in control of time. Nothing confronts my inability to control things like the passing of minutes and moments and time. It doesn't matter, for instance, how much I train and eat clean and take care of myself. I'm getting older. My body will get weaker, and I will die one day. It doesn't matter how hard I work and how much I save. All the money I've earned will one day be gone, spent by either me or those that I leave it to. So trying to calm our fears by controlling times and seasons and outcomes is a game we all eventually lose. Death comes to us all. I remember in 1996, I think it was, my grandfather was being awarded the Congressional Gold Medal of Honor. And the ceremony was held in the Capitol Rotunda. And, all these political and entertainment leaders, world leaders were in the room. And they were honoring my granddad. It was an incredible event, a moving, deeply moving event, especially for those in his family. And if you've ever been to the Capitol Rotunda, there's, busts of national leaders throughout history that surround the entire rotunda. And my granddad stood up when they presented him with the Congressional Gold Medal. He stood up, and he was just, characteristically simple and to the point. And he stood up to receive this award, and everybody stood and clapped for what seemed like 10 minutes. He hated that. He hated accolades. He hated that kind of attention. He hated that stuff. But when everybody was finished, he finally told everybody to sit down and shut up because he couldn't take it anymore. But when everybody was finished, he sat there quietly. The room was quiet for like 30 seconds. I mean, you could hear a pin drop. Everybody was waiting to hear what he would say. And I think it was the first thing he said during his speech, his acceptance speech. But he said, I want you all to take a look at all of the busts in this room. He said, whether they were Democrats or Republicans, whatever issues they stood for, they all have one thing in common. They're all dead. And it was just one of those moments where, that seemed so obvious, but it hit the room like a ton of bricks. The sobriety that happened instantaneously in that moment to the people who were there was amazing. This is what the writer is getting at here. I mean, if you're banking on your ability to control things, you're building your house on the sand. You are consigning yourself to a guaranteed disappointment. Guaranteed. One of my granddad's last books was entitled Nearing Home, Life, Faith, and Finishing Well. And in that book, he speaks openly and transparently about the difficulty of getting old. Not because he was afraid to die, but because age exacerbates the fear of insignificance. He said this, "Now that time has taken its toll and I've been relegated to the sidelines, do I matter anymore?" I think the older we get, the more common it is to ask questions like that. If we're building our identity, our sense of safety, worth, significance on things that we can't control, then we are consigning ourselves to a life of perpetual disappointments. As my granddad said, we're all going to die. Death is inevitable. It all comes back to what the writer identified at the very beginning of Ecclesiastes, where he talked about the fear we have, whether we're aware of it or not, but the deep down fear we have of nothingness, of emptiness, of meaninglessness, getting to the end of our lives and going, did any of it matter ultimately? And one of the ways we deal with this fear is by trying to control time. Slowing things down if you're enjoying the season, or speeding things up if it's a hard and heavy season. And down deep, we know we can't do that. We know it. We know that we can't control time. I have a friend named Michael Horton who said this. He said, we don't know what to do with the inevitable death we face under the sun. But by avoiding the question, by suppressing the question, we deprive ourselves of the comfort that comes from the answer. When we try to avoid thinking about it, it's one of the great modern trends I see. Even today, when people talk about funerals, nobody likes to even talk about funerals. We don't even use the word funeral. It's uncomfortable. We don't want to talk about death. Let's talk about the celebration of life. Now, listen, if you organized a celebration of life for a family member, no harm, no foul, okay? But it is, I think, insightful to look at even the change of language over the years. The ways we try to avoid the inevitable, what we know is coming. We don't like to talk about death. I mentioned last week that there are lots of preachers and motivational speakers make a fortune telling people that it's good. You can reach your potential. It's all good. Don't think about the bad stuff. Don't worry about the bad stuff. Don't worry about that stuff. Don't even look at it. It'll bring you down. Think positively. Think about your potential. We just don't like thinking about this stuff. Well, the writer to Ecclesiastes is not going to let us get away with that nonsense. He is sticking our nose in it. Because, as Horton said, my friend said, by suppressing the answer, by suppressing the question, we deprive ourselves of the comfort that comes from the answer. So, what's the solution? What do? We can't control times or seasons or outcomes. We're all going to die one day. What does any of this matter? We all live, I'm sure, with a small or a large catalog of regrets. I think if you're a parent or a grandparent, I think you probably felt what I was feeling when I was sharing a few minutes ago about my kids who were once small and not so small anymore and missing those days. We live with that. The passing of time is painful. So what's the solution? What do we do? What's the answer? We can't escape the fact that our ability to control things doesn't last. And the reason is because, as the writer says here, God has put eternity into our hearts. In other words, God has hardwired a sense of forever inside all of us. Life under the sun is not all that there is. And somewhere down deep inside all of us, we know it. Deep down, we know it. There is this haunting sense of forever that God has hardwired inside all of us. And if all we look at is time under the sun, and we ignore eternity, then we end up trying to cope with nothing but losses our entire lives. This helps me. It helps me for a variety of reasons, because when I think about moments lost, moments past, times that I can't go back to, oh, how I wish I could have, Michael J. Fox's DeLorean to go back in time to the birth of all three of my children, to hold them for the first time, to the birth of my first grandchild, second grandchild, third grandchild, hold them, look into their eyes. I wish I could go back to moments. I wish I could go back to days and seasons. I wish I could, but I can't. And that's hard. But if all we look at is time under the sun and ignore eternity, then we end up trying desperately to cope with nothing but losses our entire lives. We'll end up trying to hold on to things so tightly because we're afraid to lose it that we ruin any real chance of enjoying those same things here and now. Relationships, moments. Maybe as we get older, we become more aware of the fact that time is passing and we want to slow things down and we want to savor moments more. And so we hold on so tightly that we almost suffocate any possibility of enjoying it here and now because we're so worried that it's going to pass. It's passing. I got to hold on to it. I got to choke it. I got to keep it. That's what we consign ourselves to when we only see time under the sun and ignore eternity. If I'm always worried to lose something or lose someone, I'll squeeze it to death. I'll suffocate the very thing that God gave me to enjoy in this moment. But when we realize that this world is not all there is, and that the end of our time here is just the beginning of forever, then we're free to let time pass without feeling like we've lost something forever. We're free to enjoy the time we have. Someone once said, and I think it's true, that death is less of an exit and more of an entrance. In other words, the passage of time gets us closer to home. A deep sense of belonging that we can only experience in bits and pieces here and now. The passing of time gets us to where we were ultimately meant to be. So, for example, when I am enjoying a music festival on the beach in Miami with my kids, lost in the wonder and the sound of the music that we love, and I'm conscious of the beauty of the moment, I am experiencing a bit of eternity breaking into time. In other words, I'm experiencing a foretaste of something that will never come to an end. Ever. The joys and the pleasures of this life that God wants us to enjoy are appetizers. A taste that the best is yet to come. So when we look at time and only time under the sun, it can be depressing. But when we look at things from the vantage point of eternity, the moments that we're holding on so tightly to keep, we can now just sort of relax and enjoy, knowing that whatever it is in this moment that's making me feel alive, it will pass here and now. But that moment that I'm feeling will be perfected forever. And that's coming my way. I'm headed in that direction. In Galatians chapter 4, verse 4, Paul writes, "But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son. The light broke into the darkness. Eternity broke into time." God in Jesus began a great reversal. It's weird how God operates. Death actually gives us life. Mourning gets turned into dancing. The end of time is the beginning of eternity, a place where everything sad becomes untrue. In The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, C.S. Lewis puts it so beautifully. Wrong will be right when Aslan comes in sight. At the sound of his roar, sorrows will be no more. When he bares his teeth, winter meets its death. And when he shakes his mane, we shall have spring again. The things, in other words, that matter most will go on forever. What is it that we're really experiencing in moments that we want to savor? We're experiencing a peace, a contentedness, an awareness of beauty. We're experiencing a sense of home, safety, joy. Regardless of what the experience may be, it's all that stuff that makes us not want the moment to pass. And all of those things will be our constant, uninterrupted experience when time here, when time under the sun has come to an end. I read a book in graduate school, an obscure book written by a popular author. He'd written many, many books, but this particular one that I actually took from my granddad's library, he gave me permission, but I took it, was an obscure book of his. But I remember reading this book late one night, and these couple sentences struck me. And I searched high and low for this quote last night, high and low. I kind of knew it by heart, but I wanted to make sure I got it right, so I searched. I mean, it took 30 minutes to find this thing because it appeared in such an obscure book. But he wrote this: "Hearts on earth say in the course of joyful experience, 'I don't ever want this to end,' but it invariably does. The hearts of those in heaven say, 'I want this to go on forever,' and it will." That's this passage in a nutshell. That's you and I in a nutshell. That our hearts here and now say in those moments that we want to savor, it says, "I don't ever want this to end." 2 weeks ago, Stacy was in Texas, and Jenna and Nate and Nate's girlfriend and one of Jenna's friends who flew in from New Jersey and me, we went down to Miami to this music festival that we went to last year, and it's filled with the kind of music that we love. And one of the most beautiful sets was on a beach. The sun was setting. It was just perfection. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I have thought, and I look over at Jenna and she's just smiling and swaying, and I'm just sitting there taking it all in, savoring the moment, loving every minute of it, and thinking to myself, I don't ever want this to end. I looked at her at one point, I said, If heaven is personalized, it's going to look and feel just like this forever for me. I don't ever want this to end, but it did end. The night came to an end, and we made the long drive back to Jupiter with wonderful memories of that night, but it was over. Those moments can never be captured again in that exact same way. And so we experience those things and we say, I don't ever want this to end. But it does. But the hearts of those in heaven say, I want this to go on forever. And it will. So we are now free to enjoy all the things without feeling the need to hold on or lose them forever. Because, as I said a minute ago, the things that matter most will go on and on and on. In that sense, none of us have lost anything. Nothing. Well, this helps me deal with the sadness of days gone by, days that I wish I could go back to, because whatever I felt then in those moments that I miss now will be enjoyed more deeply and colorfully and fully than it ever was before. Foretastes, what sociologist Peter Berger calls signals of transcendence. Those moments in life under the sun when eternity breaks through. God winks at us and says, just you wait. You think this is good? You think this brings you joy and peace and happiness and contentment? Just you wait. You haven't seen anything yet. I want to close with this. It's a poem by a Czechoslovakian poet who's now dead. I think he died in the 1980s. His name was Vladimir Holin, and it's a poem called Resurrection. And my good friend John Blaze, who edited the book that was just published, posted it on one of his social media accounts last Easter. And I read it Easter morning and was so gripped. And I'm not going to explain it because I think poetry kind of loses its punch if it's explained. Just hear it, feel it. He says this, is it true that after this life of ours, we shall one day be awakened by a terrifying clamor of trumpets? Well, forgive me, God, but I console myself by thinking that the beginning and resurrection of all of us dead will simply be announced by the crowing of a rooster. And after that, we'll remain lying down a while in the comfort of our childhood covers. The first to get up will be Mother. We'll hear her quietly laying the fire, quietly putting the kettle on the stove, and cozily taking the teapot out of the cupboard. We will be home once again. Let's pray together. God, you have beautifully hardwired eternity in our hearts. And that's what our hearts are responding to in those moments we want to savor. It's that eternity in our hearts that you've placed there that is awakened, that we become conscious of in moments that we love here and now under the sun. And so, God, I pray that you would help us to savor these moments and to enjoy them for what they are. Foretastes, appetizers of what's to come. Thank you for loving us, rescuing us, saving us, and promising us that the hearts of those in heaven will say, I want this to go on forever. and it will. In Jesus' name.